Hello and welcome. You are watching the third of the stress response video presentations, Regulating the Stress Response. This is part of the Wellbeing Education Resilience Programme. We would like to highlight the Face COVID video by Russ Harris. If you haven't already seen it, please take 5 minutes to watch it as it gives a great overview of how to support wellbeing as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can click directly on the link when viewing this presentation in slideshow mode. This video will be looking at calming the stress response. Some of the topics touched upon in this video may be discussed in further detail in the Concept Index video or in one of the other webinar videos in the programme. It may be helpful to take a moment to familiarise yourself with some of the other video webinar titles. Should you have any questions in regards to these videos, please forward these to your mental health lead and they can be discussed in one of our network meeting Q&As. Here you can see what will be covered in this presentation. If you see the thought bubble symbol, it will mean there's an activity for you to have a go at should you wish to. Simply pause the video and give it a go. Remember to always be kind to yourself when watching these video presentations. Be aware of how you're feeling throughout, and should you need to, take a break or check in with a friend. There are also some suggestions on the last slides for places you can go if you would like to seek further support. In this third instalment of the stress response presentations, we'll be looking at how to calm our stress response, how to reduce the firing in our brainstem, and how to engage our cortical brain. We'll be referring to two different states when we are relating to this in the classroom. One will be the learning brain, which is when our cortical brain is fully engaged because our brainstem isn't firing because we don't feel like we're under threat or stressed. We're in a calm and safe environment. And we'll be referring to our survival brain. This will mean that we maybe feel under threat, that we're stressed, or maybe we feel unsafe. If we relate back to our children who may have experienced trauma, they will be more likely to be under hypervigilance for threat, as discussed. So their brainstem is much more likely to be firing more often, meaning they're much less likely to be able to learn as well, reinforcing the importance of a safe environment in the classroom.
Here are some traits of a child in their learning brain and traits of a child in their survival brain. Feel free to pause the video here to have a read through these. Students learn best when they feel safe and supported by the adults around them and are able to learn and play in new situations knowing that there are adults around that are protecting them. When a child's survival brain is triggered, they're looking out for danger and they may not feel safe, and this is when you may notice some of the traits on the right. The most important thing for staff to do is provide an environment where students feel safe, as that's when they're able to learn and be in their learning brain.
So in this slide we're going to be looking at the learning zone model. So if we take into consideration everything that we've learnt in regards to the stress response so far, and thinking about the child in their learning brain and a child in survival brain, we're going to look at the best environment for them to be learning in order for them to stretch their knowledge and really grow. So we have three zones. We have the black zone in the middle. This is their comfort zone. This is maybe a little bit too safe for them. We're limiting their learning because we're not pushing them. They feel safe, but they don't necessarily feel challenged, and it can become quite boring. At the top in the red, we have the panic zone. So this is where we're overstretching them. This is where they may be feeling overstressed. They may not feel safe in the environment. They may not feel supported in the environment. So it's especially our students who may be have experienced trauma and find a learning environment stressful in itself. So it's about really thinking about our students individually. What are their needs? What do we know about them? Because we want to make sure that they feel safe, they feel supported, and they feel calm, while still stretching them a little bit, still challenging them. We want them to take chances and we want them to learn and grow. So that's our green learning zone. This is that sweet spot for learning.
When a child or young person becomes overwhelmed and they exit their window of tolerance, it means that their window of tolerance has shrunk so much because their emotional pot has become so full of emotion that there is no gap left. There's no room for tolerance. There's no room for thinking. They just are in their stress response of fight, flight, freeze, flock or flop. And once out of that window of tolerance, children, young people can either be within stress responses, which are hyperarousal responses, or they may be hypoarousal responses. And hyperarousal are those kind of fight or flight children, young people who are actively demonstrating that they are not okay. Hyperarousal is more of a shutting down of the body, so the body becomes more kind of numbed or floppy or disengaged and kind of unmotivated, maybe tired, maybe feeling faint. So they kind of flop out of their window of tolerance. And the image on the side of the slide is from Beacon House Services. And it's a really nice image of what the children might look like and young people, their responses when they're not in their window of tolerance. And in terms of adults responding to somebody in distress, whether or not the young person's behaviour is hyperarousal or hypoarousal, they'll require a different kind of differentiated approach to co-regulating and to soothing. So if a young person is hyperaroused and they can't calm down, they need soothing and calming. So things like mindfulness, grounding approaches, breathing work. So it's things that you can do to kind of soothe and calm and kind of bring them back down into their window of tolerance, back to a thinking state. If a child or young person is in a hyperarousal state and their stress response is around more kind of dissociating or shutting down, or being unmotivated, being disengaged, disconnected, the adult supporting them needs to be thinking about how to activate them, how to energise them, how to reconnect them to what's been going on. So that may be some more focus on physical activity, or it may be something around something to get their senses. So maybe taste, smells, sounds, sight, things that kind of catch their eye, things that can kind of start their mind thinking and working again. And then that will help them back into their window of tolerance, back to where the body is feeling okay, it's feeling more regulated, it can access its thinking and its rational reasoning sections and be engaged and then be ready to learn.
Emotional regulation is the process of controlling one's emotions and keeping them in balance and away from extremes. Emotional regulation is not an innate skill, so helping children learn to self-regulate through co-regulation is a key part in raising children and supporting their mental health. It is demonstrated in this video by Dan Siegel, Name It to Tame It. And we also talk about this in more detail when we relate to the emotion coaching techniques, which you will find further on in the slides. Mutual regulation is the process of modelling regulation to support the child to move into self-regulation. Here are some ways in which you can help to do that. For older children or those who are more able to self-regulate, here are some self-regulation strategies.
So when we notice that a child might be maybe struggling and having a difficult time, We can start by asking ourselves what's happening here rather than what's wrong with this child. And this simple switch can help us to realise that the student might be triggered into a stress response, and this can take the different forms that we've spoken about, from freeze, flight, fight and collapse. So then we can look at what we can do for each of these different responses to help to calm and soothe that stress response with them. So we can firstly look at freeze by maybe doing the task with them, doing some deep breathing, reassuring them generally that they're safe and okay, and making things quite predictable as well, and maybe doing things more on a one-to-one basis rather than as a group. For the flight response, you can again stay close to the child and using that deep breathing to calm the stress response too, making things predictable as well, telling them they're safe and showing them a safe person that they can go to or a safe place that they can go if they need to, talking them through things that might be difficult for them, and to remind them of what they're meant to be doing alongside their friends rather than again singling them out maybe in front of the whole class. Next we have fight, so maybe giving them a role to do in the classroom and supporting them socially through things. And making things predictable and the deep breathing again is consistent throughout these responses. Connecting with them and showing empathy before jumping to those different consequences for the behaviour. Making sure they're aware of any changes to routines, especially when there might be strangers visiting the school. And also accepting that when they do go into this fight response, they might not actually remember what happened. They become so overwhelmed with trying to survive for what felt unsafe for them that they might actually forget and not be able to reflect properly on that behaviour that happened when they were in that fight response. And then lastly, with collapse, making repetitive, simple tasks, can use soothing things like a weighted blanket, building with Lego or Play-Doh, again telling them they're safe, those deep breathing exercises, and spending that time with an adult that they trust, doing the task with them and alongside them so they feel supported, and telling them what to do without showing any frustration. And also being aware that someone with this collapse response or in the collapse response won't cope very well with being the centre of attention, so always being mindful of that and again kind of letting them blend into the classroom rather than singling them out. If you want some more information on this, again, you can have a look at that Inner World Works website to find some more info on this.
So we're going to look at the 4 R's by Dr. Bruce Perry. These are great in forming relationships and resilience in our young people and educating them around their emotions and what emotions they feel in different situations and how to better behave in the future. So the first of these is to regulate their body. We connect this or interconnect it with step 2, which is to relate and connect and attune. The reason we do this is because just by relating and connecting to them, that can regulate their bodies in itself. So by this we mean we need to empathise, we need to show them that we understand and we're there for them. We can also regulate their bodies by things like breathing techniques and mindfulness, and just reminders of different things that they can do, maybe sensory stimulation, etc. Step 3 is to reason, but this is once they're regulated, because as we know, they won't necessarily be able to use their thinking brain until they're fully calm. And then we repair and problem solve. By repair, we mean that it may be a situation where you've had to say something to a young person they don't like. There may be a slight relationship problem that's occurred, and you might need to repair a relationship between yourself and a student, or yourself and another member of staff, or yourself and a parent. Or it may be that you need to problem solve around what could be done differently next time. Here is an image from Beacon House that demonstrates this quite nicely. So this one only has 3 steps on it because Repair and problem solve has come along in the later years, but is a really, really important step for building relationships and for educating our children and young people around how to appropriately behave when they are faced with difficult situations for them emotionally. Emotion coaching is one way of implementing the 4Rs and is a really, really beneficial and useful technique to use with our young people, and we'll be talking about that in the next slide.
So when we think about emotion coaching, we need to think about what it is, and we need to think about how we use this regarding kind of a stress response with our children. Emotion coaching is an easy way to follow steps 1 to 4 in helping to understand where our children are and understand their different emotions that they may experience, sometimes why they occur and how we can handle them. The important thing before we do anything is to remember that if we don't follow the steps, it doesn't work. So understanding and recognising our child's feelings is the way forward in step 1, because sometimes we identify their feelings and we're wrong because of how their stress responses, how they are, how they respond to situations. So by recognising their feelings and step 2, validating and labelling them, it makes it really clear, because what happens is our children recognise that we understand maybe what they're going through. So think about step 1 and step 2. We recognise the child's feelings and we empathise with them by putting ourselves in their position and how they may feel, and then we validate and we label them. When it comes to step 3, we need to set limits on behaviour only if needed. Remember, this is if it's behaviour that's kind of out of control. We worry that they might hurt themselves or others. But if we've done step 1 and 2, and sometimes by keep repeating them, it's a bit like a broken record. If we keep repeating them, most times we won't need to go into step 3, because we can go on to step 4 and we can problem solve with them. By them learning to problem solve and understand, it's a way of them making sure they know more about their emotions and they understand them more. So when we think about emotion coaching, it's a way forward to help to understand and recognise our children's feelings. So we need step 1, step 2, step 3 and step 4. But remember, keep it basic. Don't stress, don't worry. Just think about always going back to step 1 and 2 if it doesn't work. They are the way forward to use, step 1s and 2. And that way we can understand our children's emotions.
Stuart Shanker's 5 steps of self-regulation is a really good approach for supporting children and young people with socio-emotional mental health difficulties, and particularly those who are experiencing distress or who get overwhelmed very quickly or get overwhelmed quite often and experience and demonstrate stress responses. So there are 5 steps to go through, and the concept index has a more fuller explanation of all the 5 steps if you want to find out more about this approach. A brief overview of Stuart Shanker's approach is that the first step is about reframing the behaviour. So it's about making sure that the adults are observing the behaviour and noticing that the behaviour is a stress response as opposed to naughty or bad behaviour or wrong choices being made. Actually, that behaviour is being perceived as a bodily reaction to stressors or being overwhelmed, or the emotional well-being, the emotional reaction. So that's the first stage. And then once the adults are thinking about this and being curious about, okay, so why is the child not able to do what it is that we want them to do? Why can't they do what we want them to do? They can then start to try and be stress detectives and try to work out what kinds of things are stressing or distressing the child or young person. And there are 5 domains of stress. The 5 domains are briefly shared on the next slide, but they're going to more detail in the concept index. And these stressors can be thought about in each of these domains. Family members can share perceptions from home and what they think about their child or children, and school staff can think, and the young person themselves can reflect and think about what kinds of things cause them stress. And then step 3 is, are there ways in which the adults can reduce some of these stressors to minimise them? So, for example, if it's a biological stressor of, too much noise, is it possible to reduce the noise? Is there a way of not exposing the child or young person to so much noise? So it's thinking about environmental changes that we can make to kind of minimise, reduce some of these stressors. We know that not everything can be taken away, and so it's really important that step 4 covers how the child or young person understands their body themselves, how much awareness have they got of their own stress, help the child, young person to reflect on and to learn about their bodies, tune into their bodies, to label and give words to their bodies. Emotion coaching is a great way of doing this too. So that's step 4, is thinking about, okay, so what does the child and young person know and understand about themselves, and what kinds of things can they do? What kind of strategies can they put in place? So perhaps they could choose to put ear defenders on to help them with excessive noise. So there are things that they might be able to do for themselves. And until they're able to do that for themselves, then it may need to be co-regulated with an adult to prompt some of these strategies, and then reflect on with the young person or child to see how they found it, to see whether it helped them or not afterwards, and to remind them that they can use that again in the future. And then step 5 is, with all of those things going on, sometimes a young person is going to be overwhelmed, flooded, and be set off into their fight or flight stress responses. So step 5 is about, okay, so how are the adults going to respond, and what things might the adults do to respond to the young person or the child and to their distress? What might they do to help them? And so this might be written down and recorded in a distress response plan, which may lay out ideas for the child, young person to help themselves, but also what the adults' responsibilities are in terms of responding and supporting and helping to co-regulate and to help that child, young person manage their distress. You can see here the 5 domains of stress and stressors. So we have biological stressors, emotional, cognitive, social, and pro-social. And Stuart Shanker talks about all the different things that might come into each one of these domains, and listing the help of adults who know the child or young person well, family, as well as the young person and child themselves, to think about each of these domains and to personalise, kind of be a stress detective and try and hunt down the stresses in each of these domains.
The classroom environment is important in preventing and supporting students going through the stress response. You can do things such as creating regulation stations throughout the school, within the classroom, and this would be used for children when they become overwhelmed and dysregulated to help keep them calm. So the station itself would have things such as colouring sheets, sensory items, printouts of different breathing techniques. You can be quite creative with that. It's also important to tailor instructions and environment to meet individual children's needs and just have that calm environment for students when they are feeling like they're in that survival brain.
The Thurrock COVID-19 Child Wellbeing Support Line has been set up to support children, young people, their families and school staff during the coronavirus pandemic. It is for anybody to call or email if they'd like to speak to somebody about an issue or a theme to do with wellbeing. This can be staff from school, parents and family members, young people themselves. If they call the support line number or email the helpline email, leave a message with their name and contact number, and someone from the team will call them back. There are also some other contacts here for local support services. Now we're at the end of this session, it's a good time just to check in with yourself and to see how you're feeling now. As we said in the beginning, the content of the WER Programme can impact on how we're thinking or feeling and how it relates to us in our everyday lives. If you've been affected by anything you have read or heard about today, please seek support, either from your own support network, and there's some ideas listed on the slide here, or from additional support networks, whether that's local services or national sources of support.